Without further ado, I am really pleased that I managed to persuade Anna Valtonen to come from I know how busy the Aalto Foundation is. They have meetings several times a year, and they are big agenda items. And Anna's been a board member at Aalto now. It's the fourth year. I know Anna from many years back. She was at the School of Art and Science, the Art and Design for many years. Nokia for 12 years. In the Foresight area, Nokia Ventures Organization, and most recently now rector of Umeå Design University, Design School in Sweden. This intersection between the world of design and entrepreneurship, I think, is one of the most cutting-edge areas to explore. And I think it is, we're greatly honored, Anna, that you have taken time, and we got permission from all of the people at the Aalto University Foundation. This whole university was set up with the intent, if you read it, to push the creative envelope into change. And I think it's wonderful that a member of our foundation board is actually kicking off this series for Changemakers for us. So Anna, welcome, and we look forward. And we didn't let you in on a little secret. This is like a TEDx presentation, okay? You're gonna really enjoy it. Anna, thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Let's see what we can do with all the technology. If we can get all of this geared up. Maybe. There we go. Sorted? You okay? Good? All right. So hello everyone, and thank you for asking me, and I'm really happy to be here with you today. I'm Anna Valtonen, and like Peter said, I'm rector at Umeå Institute of Design, which is part of Umeå University in Sweden. It's a fairly big university. They have about 35,000 students, but the Institute of Design is an autonomous sort of school of its own. And unless I don't know how much you know about it, but it's actually the one Nordic design university which every time Business Week lists top 30 design universities in the world makes it on the list. So we've been ranked this last spring between places 1 and 4 globally, actually, out of the design school ranking. So it's a tiny one, but we think that we have a fair idea of how we can develop and so on. And that is actually something I'll talk more about today, because I'm not here to talk about the school, and I won't be talking about Aalto either. I'll actually be talking you through one particular project that we've been working on in order to re-evaluate the whole way we do education and try out new ways of how we could do that. And that's a project that we've been calling Prototyping the Future. So that's the one I'll be touching on today. Are you all okay? Can you hear me? Good? If there's anything you want during the presentation, just stop and ask. Otherwise, we'll have plenty of time also to continue the discussion after the presentation. So I'll talk you through a little bit about what it is that this whole concept was about. The environment at Umeå, it's to some extent, it's actually quite similar to what we have here. But out of our students, 70% are non-Swedes. So it's a very international environment, and it's also one where people come being highly motivated. I mean, if you do come to the northern parts of Sweden, equally as you would to Finland, you already know what it is that you want, and you want to do something with you burn for something, and that's really what you want to develop. And I think that's sort of quite a big criterion why this type of project is possible, because we have both the staff and the students are really talented and they're really motivated. So just so that you know, as a backgrounder, I think you need a certain amount of commitment from the group in order to even to try something that, like what we did. But it's a school that has design educations of different types. And like many of you know, of course, part of design education is very much the classical things and the skills that you would expect design education to be, like drawing and sculpting and all the other parts of it. But in today's world, it's much more than that already. I think much of it is really team working. It's the whole project development together, quite often in transdisciplinary teams, rather than someone just sticking to their own thing. And then it's also very much about prototyping, about trying out new things. You don't necessarily know where it is that you're going when you start something, but you try it, you give it, it's okay to fail, and that's part of why you would have a school or a university, that you can try out things. And then the third component that's also quite, I think, prevailing at the moment is the arrival of research in a larger extent, that you actually try to go deeper and understand what's behind the things or the phenomena that you're working with. So all of these are already today something that's sort of considered basic or fundamental in design and design education. And that wasn't really what we weren't sort of going to talk about the basics. We actually wanted to look, now that we're facing a completely new world, completely new situation, you all know about how much the world is changing. How could we prototype what would come afterwards? Because I think one thing with education which separates it from many other areas is that what you learn today, it's not only how you can use it today, you're actually going to be out there working for another, say, 50 years or 40 years, or I don't know how much, the age growth will happen in that time, but a long time. So it's not about only prepare for today, it's really about preparing for a longer future. And if we look at how much the design profession has changed in the past 50 years, we can expect at least that much. So how do we prototype for that future was really the question, now that we are in a changing world. And that's what we set out to tackle. But like you also might know, traditional university education might not always be, the most innovative way, and that's something that we've been trying to work around, both here at Aalto and in Umeå. This is a picture from the 1950s of a lecture hall. But I think this sort of image of what the classical university education is still sort of prevails somewhere, even though we can laugh at this picture from the 50s. There's still this paradigm about sort of, the classical teaching models. And that's really what we wanted to break, because what we felt as designers was that our natural way of working was quite different. It was all about sort of trying to get the ideas, and the ones that we talked about in the beginning, the prototyping, the reflection, the teamwork, all of that. How can you, if we say that we can think of the future, can't we do that with our own stuff? Not think about companies' futures or nations' futures, but maybe actually prototype our own education in different ways. So that's what all this project was about. We started the whole thing in a very typical way. We brainstormed, and we included actually not only the entire faculty, but also students, and trying to say, okay, which areas is it that we believe are upcoming sort of in the future? Which areas are new? Where do we want to go? What do we need to try out in order to work this whole thing through? The idea was that we could actually do short courses. We've actually done it, the first time we did it, we've done it a second year, and now we're currently working on the third generation of this program. But the first time we set out doing it, the idea was that we could prototype and invite the top world's people in the areas we think are developing. We could develop 1 week courses in something, and we could try it out and see if it worked, and then have some material to work based on that. So the first step was really to use all the people we had around us. What do we believe is the new thing? What's happening? What is the future? Then quite soon, the next step of that process was really to realize, okay, so if we can't exactly define what those are, at least we can identify individuals who we believe burn for something. And we can include those in the process and take them as part of it, and to develop that 1 week course. And in a sense, sort of give them the leeway to say that we know that you're cool, we know that your area is growing. What would your ideal teaching or sort of educational experience be if you could call it the game and if you could develop it? So these are a few people we invited. You might, the one to the right is because you might actually recognize them. That was the Finnish component of it. Was these are the Citra guys who had one of the workshops. But they were from all around the world, but I thought it was quite nice to share the Finnish part of it. But it was also, besides sort of changing the educational part of it, it's really also, this is a picture of our faculty, or part of it, of course, but I think it's really when you are in a creative environment, the professionals who are working in it also need to develop constantly. You can't teach something that you've learned yourself and then just repeat it. You actually need to take care of the fact that the entire faculty also develops. So as we developed the whole concept of prototyping what the future of education was, we also invented a system of where we ensure that every member of faculty has to reflect and develop what it is that their profession is going to be, how do they see their area moving. And I think that's an important part of it. So just to prove to you that it's not just students, it's actually we're all in the same boat. We can't stop from developing, then we'll just die. So this was equally a project of making sure that faculty was going somewhere. Then the next part of the process was really to once we started with a zillion ideas of what's happening in the world. Then we developed a process where we tried to together diminish the amount so that we could comb them down into a graspable amount of courses that we wanted to try. In the end, in this round, we ended up with 20 workshops because that was sort of an amount we thought we could do with the highest of quality and still have enough spread in them. In order to make some sense of them, we divided them into 4 loose groups, which I'll talk you through a little bit more in detail. But this was all in order to get it sort of going, because you might think that it's easy to do just a project like this, but what it meant was, in our case, was that we stopped the entire school for that time when we had it. Every single member of staff, member of faculty, student participated, and of course that meant that everything had to be sort of redone or restopped. So it sounds like an easy one, but it's not in practice. Once you start doing these, it takes a little bit of tweaking. This was the idea for the first year, really, how the process sort of went forward, just so that you get an idea. The whole point of it was to create a material, like in prototyping, a prototype, which you could then make strategic decisions based upon. So you would have something that you could talk about, you would have the shared experience of those people who participated, and then you would have something concrete to start going into strategic discussions. Is this where we want to go in the future? Is it not where we want to go into the future? And so on. And I think we've developed this concept since. So it actually proved that in that sense, it works. So this is just how the time schedule went, so that it sounds so easy to talk about these things, but to understand that there's a fair amount of work behind. And even just to get people into the different groups, because everyone, of course, had the opportunity to choose, and all the groups were completely mixed between people from different courses, members of faculty, all of that, to try and everyone had a choice between their first, second and third to try and get people into to get what they really burned for was a fair amount of work. But we got there in the end, and they were in 4 main groups, which came quite naturally out of the process itself. And I think one of the groups was really when we started discussing about the foundations of what we are, and in this case, the foundations of arts and creativity. What does make people creative, and how does that come about? How can we renew that thinking? What areas are there that we can develop in it? And this picture was an example of one of the courses that was held at the Ice Hotel in Jukkasjärvi, which is still another 8 hours by train further up north from where we are, and you'd think that we're already quite far up. But where they just worked in a new material. And to you, if you've spent a winter or so in Finland, you might think that snow is self-evident, right? But if you take our students, out of which the most part of them actually come from all around the world, just the ability to work in a completely new material, but with the economic perspective, with the whole sort of area or the understanding of the Ice Hotel was actually quite new. So sometimes you don't need to change the whole thing. It's quite enough just to change one part of it, like the material, to get them rethink the way they work. But there were quite a few other sort of courses also in the area of creativity, how you can rethink your rethinking. That doesn't really make sense. How you can think in a new way around topics that might sound familiar from the very start. Another set of courses that were there were really skills, which was something we sort of thought was pretty self-evident, that skills are always somehow time-based, right? So once the technology changes, once the environment you work in changes, then you also need to learn new type of designerly, in our case, skills. So that we knew that would come up in one way or another, but I think it was still quite interesting to see, because what happened was that everyone, the only sort of preconcept sort of reason for people to participate was that after it, everyone had to do a reflection paper of how did this develop them as a professional, and how could this be used strategically, should the school do this in further developments. And we could quite easily see that the skills, the new skills, were typically chosen by people who are very close to graduating. So having the newest of skills is something that people tend to do when they need to get a job. Which was funny in our case, because most of our students are actually, well, actually all of them, are headhunted before they graduate. So they wouldn't need to be worrying about getting a job. And still, once you're close to getting out there in the real world, you start worrying about, okay, are my skills up to date? Do I have the right skills for the future? So it was an interesting learning point for us as well. Who do you ask, and what motives do people have when they tell us what is the future of education? Maybe they don't always think the 50 years ahead. Maybe if they're close to making the step, then it might actually be shorter, the perspective. But there were quite a few courses in design skills that were new. Another area which was related to the previous ones were skills in general. And I think these were quite good in the sense they were also quite profoundly showing the change that we are living in as a larger society. This particular example was a presentation skills course, where a very shy guy, that guy over there, actually sort of was one of the ones who took it, and he made a presentation with a big smile in the end. But I think there's typically, like today, I'm actually talking to you, and there's much more of these situations, even for specialists in the future, where you have to interact with a larger audience in different ways. I think entrepreneurship was a typical one which was in this group, where more and more people are realizing that maybe the entrepreneurial spirit and that skill set is something that everyone needs, no matter what your speciality is, whether you are actually in economics or business or design or any other area. And quite a few other areas like that, which in a sense show the shift of society at large rather than any particular professional group. And then the fourth group, which is the most difficult one to describe, but I actually found quite interesting, was the group that we loosely coupled under a heading called design thinking. Basically because they were intellectual developments that are happening within the field, but which are sort of vaguer or sort of tougher to put your finger on what exactly they were about. So I'll talk you through those courses in a little bit of more detail so that you'll understand the grasp of what it was about. One of those, you might actually see people you know, one of those was done together with Aalto University. One group went to Shanghai to the factory there to talk about storytelling, because there's of course a big understanding in the world of today that the whole idea of storytelling is really increasing, and how do we tackle that? How do we teach it? How do we develop those methods more? There was another one which was called Agonistic Democracy, and this one was actually the one that I participated in this year, which was, to me, I know there's a detour from the whole storyline, but to me it was also a great experience to work together for a very intensive week with both faculty, sort of fellow faculty, but also students from the very, first year BA to last year MA in different areas. So I think the group itself was quite good, but we were looking at new ways of democracy when it becomes agonistic by character. So these were some of the things that came out of it. The one on the left is actually a way of saving ice bears from drowning when ice disappears. They took stances in the ecological shifts and how can we raise awareness on what's happening. The other one, there's only a small picture there, but that was an intervention we did. I mean, the beginning of the week was very much, we had theory, we did exercises, we learned statistics about sustainability and all of that, snow melting and so on, and we found out that one of the issues was that it's not only about the pollution that comes through snow, it's actually how much we pollute ourselves. In these Nordic areas, when snow comes, we put on salt and grit and gravel and whatnot in order to continue our lives just as there would be no climate, you know, as if it would be in the middle of the summer. And that actually gives a lot more pollution and a lot more things to the ground than the pollution from the sky. So we in the end of the whole thing, we did an intervention where we knew we would have a bar, a party on the last night of the week, which would collect all the people together. We also knew that we'd invited all the people, because in all of these projects, there was always an external partner joining us, whether it was the government or a company or, you know, politicians and whatnot. So they were all invited to the last night party. So we thought, okay, what can we do in one particular night to get this point up the agenda, to prove the point that it's actually us polluting rather than something falling from the sky from some other country. We designed a drink, which is the one that you see to the right. It was actually alcohol in it. We froze the glasses. We put an ice lid on it. And in the little sachet that says fast or slow, that's on to the left there was blood red salt. And the idea was that once you bought the drinks, you had two choices. Either you put the salt on the lid of ice, which means that it melts very quickly, but of course your drink will taste completely horrible. Alternatively, you can wait, you can take it slightly slower, but then you will also have a drink that actually tastes nice. And it sounds like a simple thing, but with that little intervention, it became the discussion point of the big party, and we actually got I think a lot of the awareness in the region awoken with it, and I think they've now since reduced the amount of salt and other grit they put on the ground when snow comes. So it doesn't need to be, you know, grand always. You can do small things as well when you think smartly. But that was sort of the democracy course. There was also one where there's a lot of new ways of segmenting people or understanding the end user approach in different ways, which was one of the courses. There was one, this was the one that the Citra guys were giving, was done together with the governor in the area, where they were really looking into governance and decision making and design practice. So how design thinking or design processes can help making better decisions on a governmental level, working together with those. There was one where they explored all sorts of ways of getting out of old thinking. This picture actually doesn't, the one to the right might not sort of look very funny to you, but these are actually the guys putting all the professors to I think this was their warm-up exercise on the first day when they had to move around the room in a very different way than what they'd usually do. So I think they all got their point out of it. And this was one on experience design, where it was also, Umeå is the cultural capital of Europe in 2014. So this was one where they were working again together with the local municipalities. A little bit like Helsinki being the design capital this year, where they were trying to think about the experiences that could be created in the area. So those were the 4 areas that we had in the first year, and they were just to show you, more than actually talk about the content of what was created. I think the whole idea of this presentation is to share with you processes of how we can rethink the way we work and try and together develop new ways of doing education. And it has, I think, brought a lot of good with it. We've done it once after this year. The first year was really good in just getting the whole sort of spirit of working together, getting the whole spirit of getting everyone thinking about strategic goals, getting everyone thinking about their own professional development, and getting everyone on board of what is the future. The second year was a continuation based on that, where it was really about including more of the transdisciplinarity in it. So we identified that the first year was very, because it is a design school, it was very design focused, where is design going? But the second one had a sort of broader approach. So there was a lot of, say, the combination of biology and design, biomimicry, what happens in areas like that. And also the participants for the second year, because it is a big university, we actually invited people from other areas to join us in that development process. So there was one on the new design philosophies, where we realized that actually many of those participating actually had a PhD in philosophy or other areas of the university rather than in design. And I think those actually brought even more to the table than when you lock yourself into a group of people who are only from the same area as you are yourself. And now this year we're approaching it through a little bit like you said, the big issues. In our case, we're approaching it through bigger debates or bigger groupings of areas which we believe are developing in the future. So even prototyping the future as a process is possible to prototype and is possible to develop once we go forward. But I hope that gave you at least a starting point or an idea of what the whole project is about. And then I'll be more than happy to now you've just been listening, please, let's have a discussion on how we could develop for the future.
Anna, thank you. You're bashful, right? I'll start. Should I start? You had an interesting vantage point from being on the Aalto Foundation the last 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Are we taping this? What future do you think Aalto is prototyping? You see this process, you have the benefit of coming in for board meetings at periodic, and we're experiencing this day to day. What, from your vantage point as one of our outside board members, do you think is in Aalto's knitting, future prototyping?
That's a big question.
Yes.
But I think there we can draw some parallels, even though this is a tiny project in comparison, and this was just creating one mechanism in how do we create new. But I think for Aalto, likewise, it's really, there's many aspects to it. Of course, we need to develop education and research, but in a sense, and I might be idealistic here, but I believe that we're actually pushing society. Where do we want to go as society, and how can the university actually help foster that change? How can we create not only great researchers and great people out in the real world once they're through with us, but how can we create change engines and push the whole development of where do we want to go? So in a sense, I think once you do work at a university, I think it's good to be idealistic. That is what changes the world. Unless we believe that there's a change happening, then who would? So we have a great possibility to develop, not where we want to go, but where we think that society should.
Wonderful. Questions from the floor? I'll run around here.
Yeah.
Hang on one moment, I'll get the microphone in front of you.
Actually, I have a question about the project and the participants, because for now it's been already a few years when it's on.
Mm-hmm.
So what is a feedback from the participants, especially from students, after the workshop, the classes with you? What do they think about it? What are their opinions and their feelings?
Yeah, that was to me as well, that was a very good experience to learn all of that. I think their feedback was on several levels, because we actually asked their feedback both on how did they develop as professionals individually, and then what should the school learn from it. And actually they also needed to write, when they applied for these courses, for the ones that we knew would be overly filled, it was actually their motivation letters, which meant that we chose a good mix of people for each of the courses. So they already had to think about it in advance. What many people had reflected about was that it really forced them to think about, who am I as a professional? What's my, like Peter's question when we started, what am I good at? Where do I want to go deeper? What is it that I actually want to position myself from in relation to everyone else? So typically, I think that was what most of them thought about. Then they, of course, had different feedback about the individual course that they had. Many of them also reflected on the structure itself. So everyone, I don't think I had a single one where anyone opposed to having a week of actually mixing beyond years and beyond educations. It was actually, I think, and now I'm talking as a rector, of course, but I think it was quite good in creating a school spirit, in getting everyone to feel that we're part of one school rather than part of a program or part of a year or whatever other way you'd want to group people. So that one was quite... then I think the third one that was also, virtually everyone said that they appreciated the possibility that they actually developed the school. Not some abstract leadership somewhere, but that they knew how the process went, and they could, you know, if they knew a guru that they thought were great, we'll give them a try. You know, if they turn out not to be, then fine, but if they are, we might actually be able to hire them on a longer term, and we have done so actually with some of these teachers. So I think those were the sort of main, the overall ones. Then for each of the areas, there were quite a lot of opinions on how courses went and so.
Another question about the courses.
Mm-hmm.
So the courses this project organized, these are courses like this we actually are participating right now, or are they just organizing during holiday? Or?
No, it was one intense week. And that's what that was logistically what I was trying to tell you, which was the biggest challenge in getting every single person in charge of, I mean, all the program directors to actually empty a week in their calendar. And everyone participated. So, I mean, if there was a call from press or from investors or something, I wouldn't be working for a week. If there was a lamp bulb breaking somewhere, there wouldn't be a janitor working for a week. Everything was stopped. The whole school, everything we did. And then everyone worked together on this for a week. So it sounds easy, but when you start looking into the details, there's actually a fair amount of work in just stopping an entire educational institution.
Thank you.
So how did you manage to get everybody on board? I mean, was there any kind of pushback or from the staff or the faculty? Or?
I think the only pushback was some people thinking that it's a little bit cumbersome. But on the other hand, the motivation was quite clear. We're developing what is it that you want to be. Is there an area where you need to push? Push it now. You know, we can try. So in that sense, I think it was a fairly easy case to argument because the end results are so clear. And that's maybe one of the things that we have developed all the time as well, because the first time we did it, we did start some new educations based on that, but it was tougher than we thought to integrate it into already existing educations. Whereas this year, there's a more specific route into where it will affect, which sort of groups affect, like the BA education reform that we're doing here, or if it's sort of more in the research area and so on. So now the addressee of the change is more defined than it was the first year. So that was what we've also learned during the process.
Thank you. My background is not at design work. I'm visually and graphically really bad. I'm studying marketing, but more and more I'm getting more interested in that sort of design thinking and strategic design and how that can be used in other disciplines. So where, sort of from a design school point of view, how do you see the value of that, or teaching the design thinking, maybe not design as it's the way it's been thought for a long time, so in the future?
Yep.
He's part of Marco Steinberg's group, by the way.
Yeah, but I mean, you touched exactly on the whole point of why I'm standing here. So one is that the area of design as such needs to change, which is why we did this the first year. And then the second year was really realizing that we're not talking about design as such. We're actually talking about a lot more transdisciplinary area. And that's why the second year we did it, it was typically in the borderlands between different areas. So whether it was design and biology or, you know, so sure, because we are a design school, it was a design leg into most of those areas. But in some of the courses, actually much of or an equal amount of the participants were actually from the other parts of the university. And I think that gave a lot of new understanding when you start mixing or combining or with whatever whatever you call it, whether it's two things together or whether it's a mix. So these also in the groups, you get the reflection you get from them, actually having people like philosophy professors developing design curricula can actually give you a whole lot of a different view than if you have someone who's already bought into the concept doing it.
Other questions? Great, next James.
The question is there any other ways of teaching design in the world that are not very usual and you know about those, but you didn't try them? Yeah, something you didn't try, but it's also like unusual and new. Yeah, thank you.
Totally, very much so. And like I said, I think in the first space we had to define just 20 things that we'll try out. By realizing, I mean, initially we had hundreds and hundreds of ideas. So in that sense, of course, the point was to create the material based on which we can make the strategic decisions. But it was more than that. It was also to understanding that at least we can't be exactly the same as we are now. So how do we create the processes through which we can change, rather than saying that this is the ultimate or the total amount of change that we need, or these are the eternal 20 new courses and then nothing else applies. So it was really just getting the whole thought process started. How you know, the world will change. How do we change with it?
Any questions? Back here again.
Actually, I have a question about the origins of this project. Could you describe in maybe a few sentences, maybe less, as you like, what was the idea of the project? What made you do this?
You're asking me personally? I mean, sort of, you know, if I talk sort of to you as an individual, I think there was many reasons, of course, like there always is in these. I mean, one is that I felt that we needed a strategic tool to talk about change and to talk about what the future is. The other part of the story was, of course, that this is now 3 or so years ago. I was new as a rector. So, and the person who had done the job before me had been away for a while, so there was clearly a gap or a need for change, and you know, a lot of people had a lot of ideas how we should change, and now that there was new management and new things going on. And it would have been tough to tackle those one at a time, all of them. So it was easier to actually together work on a method, all of us, where we could have the discussion as a shared one, rather than try and this week we'll solve, you know, that course, and next week we'll tackle that area. I think the whole idea of everyone sharing it, the experience, and having a process for it was much more fruitful in this case.
We gotta get one of these little boxes to throw around here. Probably. That would make life easier.
We're just trying to give you your weekly exercise, you know.
I've got a couple of different questions. You've added a lot of stuff to your syllabuses and courses. What did you take away?
Now you're touching on the toughest one, and that's exactly, that is the big point, because it's always easy to add, but how do you take away something? And that's why this year we've been trying to work on it, and this year there is a clearer sort of change, sort of direction for where the change needs to happen, because we have to be able to take away as well. And that's always tough. It doesn't matter if it's taking away your dearest courses out of the curricula, or firing people, or, you know, shutting down educational programs. Those decisions are tough. So.
And then, what did you fail at?
What did we fail at? I don't know. I think we've sort of taken the failure bits as the ones that we need to develop for next year. So it hasn't really been, it's not been about pinpointing, you know, that absolutely doesn't work. Of course, we realised after the thing that we don't want to have that area as part of curricula. It's quite good as just having it as small courses or something like that. But that was part of what was meant to be happening. And I think the areas which worked less well, we found out during the process, and those are particularly the areas we've tried to develop always for the next round. So like I said, last year and the first time, it was really about involving everyone. Last year there was even a tool which allowed crowdsourcing, so everyone could, for a long time already, the moment they heard of someone interesting, the moment they could just, turn in an idea and so on. And then after that we realised that it becomes this sort of, well of wishes. And it's tougher then to get people to take it onwards from there. Everyone agrees that, yeah, this is brilliant, but who should take it on? And that's the one that we've been working more on for this year's round, that there's a clear someone to take each of the areas forward. But I think it's a good platform to develop, and I think sort of failure is a tough one when this one is supposed to be, some are supposed to be good and some less, and you learn from those as well.
Other questions? Not at all. Back there, yes.
Yes, slightly technical question. So, as I understood, there were these weekly courses, like intensive weekly courses, but besides, students also took the regular courses, right?
No, everything was stopped during that week.
Yeah, but the 1 week, but what about the rest?
Yeah. Of course, the planning and so on took time, and a lot of the students were involved in that process. Particularly the Students' Union was quite strong in developing the whole concept with us as well. But during that week, that was, I think, to be honest, much of the negotiation actually had to be done there with the people who own educational programs to actually stop and to make sure that everyone is free that week.
And
everyone.
Yeah. And how many such weeks were during the year?
It's just this one week, once a year. And then, of course, you do the reflection paper afterwards and take the decisions based on that.
Okay.
But it's a very intense week.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I've borrowed an idea from this. How big is the institute?
It's very small, and that's part of the whole thing. There's 3 MA programs, and then...
So how many students in total going through your programs?
That's a good question. The governmental number is 168, and then we have about the same amount of people so about twice that.
Because the development path that has been described in this prototyping is one of these emerging areas in entrepreneurship education. You take small experiments,
Yeah.
you accept failure,
Yeah.
you co-create things with people,
Yeah.
including customers,
Yeah.
which in Aalto is a much bigger experiment with very complicated numbers of schools and so on to try and bring that together. And I'd be curious, as we're going on this mission with the Ventures program, we ought to do exactly the same thing. I want you to think about whether that would be a very good development path for our Ventures program, given that we're small. And somebody described me, I use the word disruption a lot. Disruption gets people anxious, nervous. It's a word that gets your hair standing on end. It's actually nonconformity, positive nonconformity.
But you're absolutely right, and scale is an advantage. So the second year, once we opened it for the entire university, which is 35,000 students, the complexity level increases a lot, because then you have to sort of choose, okay, so who do you accept? What are the criteria? How do you make a mixture? How do you still keep sort of the designerly approach if there's, so that it doesn't blend out totally and so on. So it was easy the first year when it's sort of design alone or sort of within its own sphere. But what happens once you enlarge the whole concept?
Wonderful.
There's a bit to work around.
Any last questions for Anna? Boy, you came prepared, sir.
Probably last question from me. In prospective future thinking, do you think that such integration, such courses, classes can even be used even in another organization than universities? Can it be successful in another fields than education, for example, in some kind of enterprises or whatever?
Of course. I mean, the point of all of this was that if you want change, just try it. Don't be afraid of failing. Give it a try. it's a lot faster to give it a week's trial, learn from it, and then make decisions based on that rather than trying to. Because typically what happens, and now I'm talking, I shouldn't be saying this, but typically in a university what does happen is that you talk about change a lot. But when the change actually needs to happen, it becomes so big that it's quite grueling to do it. Whereas if you actually do something quick and then everyone has something concrete to talk about, it's a lot easier. So yeah, I like the area, but then again, we should structure it slightly differently, and maybe we meant that, but we should add that component, and we get forward in the process a lot quicker than if we just talk and then try to make something massive.
Great. Well, Anna, thank you so much
Thank you.
for sharing your insights. I think it's very appropriate that we kind of kick this off with the university-level debate about change. I cannot agree more that you have to do this in little bite-sized chunks. This is a nice little prototyping platform. I just want to introduce at the back, before we thank Anna. There's a couple of guys at the back you're going to get to know in addition to me. Khaled is up there, and Risto. And we have our own little institute to do some change with. And if people who have known me and the way I teach, I disrupt things. I love disrupting stuff. And I love the fact that actually we should be engaging customers in this process. And already in the roadmap, I can tell you this morning, Holly and I had a conversation. I am looking to explore condensing all of my courses, all of them, from a once-a-week format to a day, day and a half, 2 days long. And this, I think, will be a good testing platform. This is exactly why Aalto was set up. We don't put concrete over silos, and we should be doing stuff that looks somewhat non-routine, but could actually kind of test out and push the creative envelope. And if you're entrepreneurs in here, that's the space that big companies and big organizations find incredibly difficult to do. Very difficult. But I hope through this process with the Changemakers, you're not only going to meet some very interesting people pushing the creative envelope in all sorts of contexts, big business, small business, new business, social enterprise, education, but we look forward to actually co-creating this with you guys. That's why I'm interested in getting you on the list. You must be here for a reason. And I want to get that kind of non-conformist flame up in some of you, because once you get hooked on this kind of stuff, this is where you find entrepreneurial opportunity. But you have to kind of know the routine you're questioning. And universities are long and established and very good at many things, but change on a big scale is not one of them. It takes a long time. But on that note, Anna, thank you so much for taking your time from coming from a very long and detailed board meeting today and half of tomorrow. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And we can join in. Little marketing for next week. Same time, same place.